Dwight Howard is one of the greatest big men that the league has ever seen, and even more notably than that, one of the greatest defenders the league has ever seen.
I don't know if it was a personal slight, but look, Dwight Howard is the best center in the NBA.
Dwight Howard at his prime was undeniably the best center in the league for over half a decade. The combination of size and athletic ability was unlike anyone that's ever touched an NBA floor, and at this time, there was truly no one dominating the paint to the extent that Howard reached. If you ask anyone who played in the league at this time on what it was like to face up against him, they're probably still shitting their pants thinking about meeting this guy at the rim. But if you ask most people about Dwight Howard today, he's soft, he's lazy, he's overrated, and he's a waste of potential. Howard's an undeniable first ballot Hall of Famer, with an impact that progressed the entire league. So why is he so disrespected to the extent that he is today? Well, for that, we need to go back. Dwight was born into quite this situation, being the lucky number 8 after 7 miscarriages. He was already lucking out, and even more so, he lucked out being born into a support system that would keep him out of the violent environment that he was surrounded by. Born into a subpar neighborhood in Atlanta, Georgia, there was nothing safe about it, and as a police officer, Dwight Howard Sr. knew this all too well. Dwight's dad didn't even let him and his friends walk down the street alone, and for that reason, Dwight just played basketball in the driveway all day instead. As the only one with a hoop in the neighborhood, they hosted all the games, of course, so Dwight managed to weasel into pickup games with the older kids. His game escalated pretty quickly. Play against the heightened competition, he began to build a name for himself. Older kids in his neighborhood took notice and pushed him towards the sport and away from the distractions that far too many find themselves involved with. When he got to high school, it was a little bit of a different story. Standing at 5'10" and running the point guard, his lifetime goal of making the NBA seemed stupidly far-fetched. He was an athletic kid, he could blow by guys and get to the tin, but shooting up to 6'9" flipped the script entirely. Now starting varsity as a sophomore, and things quickly began to change. Being the fastest guy on the floor at 5'10" is one thing, but a foot later, and you're now the biggest thing in high school basketball. Dwight went on to dominate along with all-time great shooter Javaris Crittenton in high school. Finishing his junior year averaging 20 and 15, he clearly was an exceptionally dominant player at this level. Following up this year with one of the dumbest stat lines I've ever heard with 24, 18, and 8 blocks as a senior with the Georgia State Championship. Yeah, Dwight was far and away the best player in the country, finishing as Gatorade Player of the Year. He was looked at as the full package, of course, with his ability to defend, rebound, and finish inside, but his time as a guard also translated pretty well to having good footwork as a perimeter defender. His scouting report at the time definitely sounds a little goofy, praising his passing skills and jump shot, but hey, this is how he was looked at coming out of high school. And with the immediate defensive impact of a guy like Dwight could have on your team, it's no wonder why he was regarded as one of the best prospects in the world after declaring for the NBA draft. The Magic, having had a hole to fill ever since Shaq's departure, they jumped on the opportunity right away, drafting Dwight Howard first overall. On a team that really needed help, finishing at 21 and 61, and losing their far and away best player in Tracy McGrady, they really couldn't afford to miss on this pick. And with the addition of Dwight, adding to a team with Grant Hill and Steve Francis, the Magic jumped 15 games while Dwight showed some real life, averaging 12 and 10, showing an immediate impact, especially as a defender. There was a lot of good with his game. With a 36-inch vert standing 6'9" or 6'10", he served as a very solid rebounder and help defender. At nearly 2 blocks a game already, he not only had the ability to jump with anyone, but the timing, the footwork, and the willingness to take a foul or get yammed on if he has to. However, there were certainly some flaws in his game as well. Teammate Grant Hill told Howard that his limiting factors at the time lied in his skinny frame and inability to score for himself in the post. Taking these words to heart, Dwight came back with 20 pounds of lean muscle mass the next season and upped his production consistently over the next 2 years, steadily climbing the ladder among the best centers in the league. His 4th year, however, was when he and the Magic climbed the ladder in a lot of ways. Not only was Dwight probably the best center in the league this season, leading the league in rebounds, but the Magic rebranded in a very interesting way to embrace their new superstar. The hire of Stan Van Gundy and pickups of crucial guys like Rashard Lewis and Hedo Turkoglu, as well as the continual development of Jameer Nelson and eventually JJ Redick, started to really define their identity. Utilizing Dwight in a very similar way to Hakeem Olajuwon in the 90s, starting their big guy with shooters and an offense focused on spread, screen, and rolls and a lot of post-ups. This proved to be an immensely effective offense immediately, and was kind of the only of its kind during this time, jumping from 40 and 42 with the 22nd best offensive rating to 52 and 30 and 7th in offensive rating. The next year, this just amplified, and this team really left their mark on history. They truly were 100% bought into Dwight at this time. In a year that saw Dwight Howard grabbing the Defensive Player of the Year award, he cemented himself as not only the best defender in the league, but one of the best of all time, and one of the best players in the world as well. I mean, he was pushing the limit on how far a defensive-minded big guy could go. The Magic, despite not really having another guy on the roster that I would label a great defender, led the league with a 101 defensive rating for the year. The whole defensive game plan was extremely simple. Close out hard, play tight, and funnel everybody into the paint, and force shot attempts against one of the best paint defenders to ever play the game. Yeah, that's basically all it took. With this guy averaging just under 14 rebounds and 3 blocks a game. But it wasn't only that. I mean, offensively, this guy was a weapon too. At this time, a Dwight Howard spread pick and roll may have been the most effective play in the league. Jameer Nelson was a pretty damn underrated pick and roll ball handler, having the ability to shoot off of on-ball screens, kick out and throw lobs, while this ridiculous talent Dwight Howard had as an interior finisher pulled insane attention away from the shooters outside. The flaw in their offense, as many like to point out, is the underutilization of the pick and roll. Dwight was for his career a very post-up heavy guy, and realistically his game was not that well suited for this style of play. His game was just really choppy down there, and he really wasn't quick or willing to kick out of doubles despite having a team full of shooters around him. This led to low assist totals and horrendous assist to turnover ratios. Dwight catches a lot of flack for his wannabe post game, but at this point it's hard to call him a bad post player, shooting 70% at the basket, with him shooting upwards of 60% of his shots coming from the post. Despite the lack of a smooth game, he certainly was so ridiculously strong and amazingly athletic that he could force easy shot downs there without much work. I mean, you can cut corners when you're this talented. Dwight was a monstrous player, any way you want to look at it, and finishing at 59 and 23 made them undeniably a threat to anyone in the league. But to say that they were favorite wouldn't exactly be true. NBA fans were very high on a Celtics-Lakers rematch, or finally seeing Kobe and LeBron go at it. The Magic matching up with the Celtics in the second round took them down in 7 following an injury to KG, and matching up with the Cleveland LeBrons, despite a monster performance, the Magic took them down in 6 on the back of Dwight Howard putting up a very impressive 26 and 13 a game, punching their tickets to the NBA Finals. In a series that saw Kobe on his revenge tour, it's safe to say that they were completely outmatched, losing in 5, but the Magic running all the way to the promised land was a hell of a feat for a young team on the back of a 23-year-old center. And really, if the ball swings in their favor a little more in some of those tight games, history may have been rewritten. How good the Magic were, however, was quite debatable. They had a heavy reliance on Dwight, of course, which worked out fine, missing just 3 games up to this point. But the Magic decided to switch up from their current strategy, parting ways with Hito and bringing in Vince Carter in a trade. Hito was an incredibly impactful player to the Magic as a shooter off the catch and off the bounce, as well as an underrated facilitator that fit great at their fast-paced offense. This move was not the greatest personally. I think breaking up the harmony of what they had going was pretty questionable, even if the idea of a secondary scorer that isn't as reliant on Howard admittedly makes some sense. Regardless, the Magic were a very good team still at this time. At another 59 wins and another Defensive Player of the Year performance, not a ton changed seemingly. Sadly, they were not able to get back to the finals this year, losing in the Eastern Conference Finals to the fully healthy Celtics, on the back of a very bad performance by Vince Carter. This sparked an oh shit moment for the Magic, I'm assuming. They're seemingly on the cusp of getting their first title and pulled the trigger on a deal bringing back Hito and acquiring Jason Richardson, just 1 year later sending Vince to Phoenix. The same offseason, they also brought in Gilbert Arenas for Rashard Lewis in a trade that definitely flopped. It seemed like Orlando was gambling out of necessity to try to get enough to get over the hump at this point, but it doesn't really work like that. The Magic were super up and down with the new mismatched faces on the roster, finishing as a pretty average team offensively, and a 52-win season off of another defensive carry job. The synergy was very off with these guys, and it didn't seem like they added much to Dwight's game despite him having the most dominant offensive season of his career, as well as winning a 3rd straight Defensive Player of the Year. I mean, it's crazy how dominant he was at this time. I mean, a Dwight Howard pick and roll was generating an average of 1.4 points per possession at this time. He was one of the most valuable weapons in the league, finishing 2nd MVP voting, even though everyone wants to call this the LeBron vs. D-Rose year. I think the first round of the playoffs this year shows why this was the downfall of the Orlando Magic, because holy shit did everybody else stink it up. 2 other double-digit scorers, both shooting under 40%. I mean, despite the team likely having some more talent on paper, it really was not built to win in the fashion that it was in 2009. At this point, the Orlando Magic were in a downward freefall, despite Dwight opting in for one more year into 2013. The drama around him and the team was tearing up this whole show. One day he's in, one day he's out, one day he's requesting Stan Van to be fired. Shortly after this awkward situation, Dwight would go down with a season-ending back surgery, and shortly after that would request a trade, landing in Los Angeles and take shots at his teammates on the way out. Now in LA, and with first ballot Hall of Fame talent all around him, this team is infamous for the colossal failure of a season. Dwight did battle with injuries during this time, and did catch a ton of blame for the Lakers' mediocre 45-win season and first-round sweep. To be fair, he didn't really want to run pick and rolls with Steve Nash, to which kind of made no sense, but his play on the court realistically was overhated on. Dwight was still well above average at 17 and 12, while still being a very, very good defender despite having dropped off in that regard. More issues arose off the court, however. Nash and Kobe seemed to voice their frustrations in the lack of focus and competitiveness that he displayed. He seemed set in his ways as a post player who was declining greatly in that regard, not wanting to utilize his most valuable assets and dicking off in the process in the presence of guys who certainly were not here for fun and games. This team really disappointed, and Howard was gone shortly after, playing in Houston. As Howard arrived here, a similar trend can be seen. His first year was actually pretty solid, and what I would consider his last year as a star in the league, before over the next 2 years his numbers would steadily decline. This can likely be pointed to 2 or 3 major factors that completely ruined the dynamic that a Harden and Howard team could and should have. Firstly, the obvious injury bug leaving him out from time to time didn't help. Secondly, again, this is where his post-up tendency got very bad. This chart alone shows you the odd denial of what his skill set really was. He's posting up more than guys like LaMarcus Aldridge, when at this time the aging and injuries kind of derailed his ability to score inside. He couldn't cut corners like he used to. The odd part is, why the hell would he want to do this? I mean, James Harden is a perfect pick and roll guy, and at 1.3 points per possession, he was still one of the deadliest roll men in the league. This likely had to do with the fall of the two's relationship, to where teammates were forced to choose a side. Yeah, it was pretty toxic. Dwight's reputation certainly took a hit from his Orlando days, when the young star was throwing down hammers with a Superman cape. Things like elbowing Kobe in the face and laughing it off when he calls him soft made Dwight one of the most hated players in the league, and really spread the message that this guy was just kinda really weird. After this point, Dwight was a hardcore journeyman, bouncing from bad team to bad team, putting up kinda mid-starter numbers. It's really hard to say how valuable he was at this time. His unwillingness to serve as a role man kinda inhibited his value when he's not the same dominant guy that he was. After trials in Atlanta, Charlotte, and Washington, he was traded to Memphis and waived in 2019, leaving him out of the NBA. This kinda looks like the end of one weird career, but the injury to DeMarcus Cousins did give him a second shot in LA that he was more than willing to take. The reality check being bounced from the league was certainly necessary for him, as he seemed to finally understand that as a hyper-athletic big man, you screen, you roll, and you do the dirty work to make yourself valuable. At 7 and 7 with a block on sky-high shooting, he certainly understood his role and definitely played a big part in an LA chip that he should have had a long time ago. This was a bounce back for the guy. I mean, it was a cool way to come back, and he played a few more seasons before moving overseas. and likely being done from the NBA, capping off one interesting career. Dwight's an odd one, as the early dominance in his career easily pushed him in the top 50-ish range, top 15-ish at his position. He was incredible at this time, and incredibly underrated or overhated in this time. It's obvious why a downfall that lasted a lot longer than his peak, caused by his own responses to bad situations and just kind of questionable decisions overall, left a bad taste in people's mouths. Regardless of what you might think of him, Dwight Howard's NBA career will certainly be remembered for the good, the bad, and the ugly. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you boys in the next one. Peace out.